Right, so today's lecture is going to be on population and community dynamics. So let's just start off with a couple like basic terms that we have. So first is population, which is just a group of individuals within a single species living in a certain area. So you could just say like wolves living, or sorry, like hawks near the Hopkins school or something like that. That would be a population. Density is just individuals per unit area or volume. So in this lesson, we're going to be mostly talking about population density as opposed to like what you're normally used to. And then we have the mark recapture method, which is the main method in which scientists capture individuals from a species, tag them, and then release them. They will then wait for them to mix back within the population and recapture more individuals, but this time ignore the already counted ones. So this way you can capture a bunch of like organisms, and then you can mark them so that you won't count them twice. And then you can see how the number of new organisms changes as you move from like the first, second, third, fourth capture cycle. And then from there, you can just extrapolate and then determine how many there are in a certain area. The next thing we're going to talk about is dispersion. So we have three different types, which are clumped, uniform, and random. So clumped usually occurs when you have a bunch of resources like concentrated within a certain area, or you have organisms that like to stay in packs. Random occurs with like seed dispersal because you have no idea where and when something's going to get dropped. So it just occurs randomly. And then uniform is usually when organisms are acting like territorially. So like they want to stay in very specific areas. So they tend not to move around too much, and then you get a uniform dispersion. So the changes in population size are given by like a few specific equations. So the first one is population size change. This one's pretty obvious. You have the number of births plus immigrants, which is the number you're getting from somewhere else, minus the deaths, minus the emigrants, which is just the number of organisms leaving a certain area. Population growth rate is equal to delta n over delta t, which is change in population size over change in time. And R is equal to births minus deaths over population size. So we have two main types, exponential and logistic growth. So we'll start with exponential population growth. So this occurs when there are unlimited supplies and no carrying capacity. And carrying capacity is just like the maximum amount of organisms you can have in a certain area, which are dictated by the supplies and resources that you have. Intrinsic rate of increase is the per capita rate of increase at a certain time. dn over dt equals r times n, and this is called a J curve. It's called a J curve because it looks like a J. The population size just keeps increasing even faster and faster as time increases. And logistic growth. So this occurs when there are a limited amount of supplies in space, which means there is competition here. So you cannot just keep increasing the population size however much you want. It has to stop at some point. And that stops at the carrying capacity, which is the maximum population size. The formula is given by Rn times k minus n over k. And this is considered an S curve because the graph looks like an S. So next you have regulation factors. So you have the density independent and the density dependent factors. So the density independent is the rate that does not change or a density independent factor is one where the rate does not change based on population density. So human activities and natural disasters. So stuff like this, like if an earthquake is gonna happen, it's gonna happen. It doesn't matter how many people or whatever is there, it's going to happen anyways. And a density dependent one is one that does change based on population density. So disease, food shortages, and competition, right? Because if you have unlimited resources, or let's say you have a limited amount of resources, then you will have competition if you have more organisms. Food shortages, same thing. If you have too many people and too little food, then you will have a shortage. And disease does count as a density dependent one because although you could have a disease without like too many organisms, the fact of the matter is the disease has to spread, just like in the pandemic we are right now, it needs a medium or a host in order to spread and mutate. So that's why this would be considered a density dependent factor. So next we're going to talk about different relationships between two organisms. So the first one is competition, and we're going to denote them with like a plus or minus, and we'll have two, one for like each one of the two things in the relationship. So this is an interaction between different species for a specific common resource, which results in lower reproduction for both species. This is just basically two organisms, let's say they occupy the same niche, which means maybe they're in the same area, or they both are going for like the same food or whatever, then they're going to compete against each other. And competitive exclusion is a slight reproductive advantage, which results in elimination of inferior species. So this is just when one species is just better off than the other one, just because it is, and then that ends up reproducing more and eliminates the inferior one. So competition, again, this will occur in logistic growth, but it will not occur in the exponential growth because you have unlimited resources, so you don't need to compete for those. And this is competition in ecological niches, and an ecological niche is just resources an organism uses in its environment. So whether it's like a space or like its home, which food it eats, etc. The same niches results in resource partitioning, which is split into fundamental niche and realized niche, and character displacement, which are evolutionary changes due to shared niches. So let's say you have like two different organisms which are both competing for the same resource. So this is competition. So one organism might have to like just change like through time evolution, right? In order to like adapt to make maybe a different niche instead, or maybe to even be like more capable of competition within this niche. So that would be character displacement. All right, so next we have exploitation. This is where one species benefits from feeding off another. So this is similar to like parasitism. We know that where you have a parasite inside like a host, and the host is the one that gets attacked and the parasite is like chilling. Another example is predation. And because of predation, we have defensive adaptations, one of which is aposematic coloration, which is a warning coloration. There's also cryptic coloration, which is camouflage, Batesian mimicry, which is harmless species mimics adaptations of harmful species. And then Müllerian mimicry is two or more harmful species evolve to resemble one another. So basically, Batesian mimicry is displayed with the image on the right because you have two snakes, one of which is venomous and one of which is not. But to a predator, they both look very similar. So it's going to stay away from both types. And the image on the left is an example of Müllerian mimicry because you have two or more harmful species which like resemble one another. Next part is herbivory, which is just an herbivore eats part of a plant. That's still considered exploitation because the plant is still an organism and so is the thing eating it. Yeah, this is parasitism that I was talking about earlier. So you have the parasite, the exploiter, takes advantage of the host, which is the exploited. Endoparasites live inside the host body, whereas ectoparasites feed on the surface. And this can weaken or even kill the host. The next one is mutualism, where both organisms gain an advantage through the interaction. So benefits outweigh the costs. So in this slide, we have two images, one of which is with an alligator and a bird. So basically, the bird is gonna like pluck out stuff like food stuck within the alligator's teeth. So this means that like the bird will get like its meal and the alligator gets its teeth cleaned for free. So it works well for both of them. The next one is the one with the clownfish and the sea anemone. So the thing is, the anemone provides like a home for the clownfish, and then the clownfish can also like feed on stuff around it and drop stuff there. I think, I'm not entirely sure. The Commentalism is where one species is helped, but the other one is like unaffected. So in this one organism or group benefits and the other is unaffected. So in this picture, you have the smaller fish, which are seeking shelter from the larger fish. So probably its predators will be like less or more apprehensive to actually go over there and try to eat them. And this doesn't really affect the larger fish in any way. So it's the same with or without the smaller fish. And next you have species diversity. So this consists of richness, which is the number of species, and the relative abundance, which is percent of total population. So in community 1, you'll notice that each one of these different tree types have 25%. So, and in community 2, you have 80% for A, 5% for B and C, and then 10% for D. So the richness for both of them will be the same because the number of species is still 4, but then relative abundance will be like much more skewed for number 2 because A is obviously much more abundant than anything else. Whereas in community 1, everything is a lot more even because it's all split 25%. Oh, sorry. Okay, not that. Okay. Trophic structure. The next one you have is just like in this image just shows like a food web. So at the bottom of a food web, you obviously always have the primary producer, and then you just follow up the thing. So the next one is the primary consumer, then you have the secondary consumer, and then the tertiary consumer. So in this slide, the bottom one is the phytoplankton, which is the primary producer. The next thing, which is eating the phytoplankton, that's you just follow the arrows to figure out where the energy is traveling. So you have the zooplankton, which is the primary consumer because it's eating the phytoplankton. Next, you have the secondary consumers, which are both the sea nettle and the fish larvae, because both of them are eating the zooplankton, so they become secondary consumers. And then the tertiary consumers are the sea nettle and the juvenile striped bass. So the thing is, the sea nettle is both a secondary consumer and a tertiary consumer because it's eating a primary consumer, so it makes it secondary, but it's also eating a secondary consumer, so it becomes tertiary because it's eating the fish larvae too. So this organism would be considered both. And juvenile striped bass is a tertiary consumer because it's eating the fish larvae, which is a secondary consumer. So you have the foundation species, which have a high abundance and provide food. So in this case, it's most likely going to be the phytoplankton. You have the keystone species, which is usually not abundant in a community, but they do play a pivotal role because they maintain diversity. So one example of this is sea stars. Ecosystem engineers dramatically alter the environment. And one example is beavers, because beavers, we all know they like to make dams for their homes, and that can change the flow of any body of water and therefore the environment. Bottom-up control is abundance of organisms is dependent on nutrient supply at lower trophic levels. So, and top-down control is controlled by abundance at higher trophic levels. So basically bottom-up control just means the abundance of organisms in like an ecosystem is based on like probably like the primary producers. So probably like the phytoplankton in the previous example. And top-down control would be at higher trophic levels. So that would be the sea bass and the sea nettle. All right, do you guys have any questions? All right, okay. So we're gonna play a Kahoot game. It's pretty short, but I think it covers the important stuff. Okay, no, I do not want to level up. All right, give me a second. It's loading. All right, cool. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen. All right, feel free to join the Kahoot game right now. Or I'll start in like a minute-ish. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and start now. I think it's only like 4 questions long, so. All right, cool. So yeah, producers reproduce quickly, but are also consumed at a rapid rate. I can't get the image back, which is unfortunate. Or never mind. Okay, never mind, it's right there. Okay. So all right, so that's the correct answer. Let's check through the other ones though. So biomass decreases with higher trophic levels. That's true that the secondary consumer is really less, but usually how it works is that you have the most amount of producers, then primary, then secondary, so on and so forth. But in this case, the primary consumer is greater than the producers, so we wouldn't go with the diamond. The circle is humans represent the lowest trophic level. The lowest trophic level was given here as producers. Humans are never producers. Producers must be organisms that can perform photosynthesis because they get their energy from the sun. So humans would usually be primary consumers if they're eating like vegetables and fruits and stuff like that, but then they would also be they could be as high as up as like tertiary consumers if they're eating like, I don't know, shark. I don't know, people eat shark. And this the square is this biomass pyramid is consistent with algal bloom. That's not true because algal bloom means you have a lot of algae, which is considered a producer. So producer would be the highest. All right, but 3 we got it right, so coolio. We'll go on to the next question. All right, and just to remind you, plus means it's good, minus means it's bad, 0 means no effect. All right, cool. Yeah, all you guys got that right. So yeah, predation is plus minus because an organism is getting food and the other one's getting killed. So I don't think you want to be the one getting killed. And mutualism is considered a plus plus. It's in the name mutual. So yeah, both organisms are being advantaged here. All right, next question. All right. Okay. So the question asks for increase in competition. So an increase in the reproduction rate of voles would mean you have more voles, which means it's the same number of resources, so you're going to have more competition. And the other one was triangle. An increase in the number of hawk predators would mean that you have that means you have more predators, and voles are its prey basically. So then if there are more predators, that means you'll end up with less prey because you're getting eaten. So if you have less voles, then that would be less competition within the vole population. An increase in temperature is just the most arbitrary thing ever. And an epidemic of rabies within the vole population would mean that you have fewer voles again, because a lot of them are dying. And if it's easier to think about it in like an analogy, think about this as like college applications. There are only so many seats at like the T20 universities, but if you have an increase in reproduction rate, or let's say that means like an increase in the number of students applying there, it's going to be harder to get in. So that's more competition because, less acceptance rate. All right, let's go to the next question.
I had a quick question here. So when you said that what increases the competition, I thought that if they're in a problem, they'll compete for the resources because the resources are getting consumed quicker.
Was there like a certain option you were referring to when you're asking this question, or are you just saying in general?
I clicked the red one because I thought that if there are more predators, more will die, and there will be a competition of who will survive and for the resources.
Okay, so whenever we say competition, it means that it's a certain population which is competing for a set amount of resources, right? So yeah, so whenever you think competition, it's really just two factors. It's just the amount of resources and the population. That's really it, right? Yeah, each organism occupies a different niche, so each organism will want a different thing. So a hawk won't want the same thing as a vole. So if more voles are dying, then you have the same amount of resources and less population.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, cool. Yeah, no problem. All right, last question. All right. Yeah, so the answer is 0.09. My bad. I think I went through this stuff really quickly because I talk really fast. So I don't know if you guys caught it when I was doing the slides. If you guys didn't catch anything, feel free to look at the slides afterwards. But yeah, so it's 0.09. So basically it's just births minus deaths over the current population size. So the current population is 100, and then you have births minus deaths. So 34 minus 25, which is 9. 9 over 100 is 0.09. 0.25 would be the death rate, 0.34 would be the birth rate, and 0.66 is, I don't know what that is. I think that was just a random number I made up. All right. All right, good job to everyone. All right, so that's the end of that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask now. Otherwise, you guys are free to go.